Hello, and thank you for joining us on today's episode of Constructive Conversations, the podcast where we aim to bridge the gap in communications between contractors and customers. Joining us today, we have Byron Brooks, a carpenter and custom home builder who works with Alair Homes. You own or work with?
Yeah, I own an Alair Homes unit. Yeah.
And he's also the founder of Builders and Brews, a local builder networking event.
That's right.
Byron, thanks for coming on.
No
It's a pleasure
problem.
to
Thanks
have
for
you.
having me, man.
Yeah, so tell me more a little bit about your background, how you got into the industry and what you do now with Alair Homes.
Sure. So I got to carpentry because I wasn't a good student. So I was invited to leave high school a little early, and I had a bunch of uncles who worked in construction, and so I kind of knew that sitting behind a desk wasn't going to be the path for me. So I went straight into carpentry and construction, building greenhouses initially, and then started my carpentry apprenticeship building big tall concrete buildings in Vancouver for 8 or 10 rainy years.
Cool.
hmm
Awesome. And then what led you into Alair Homes?
So I got to Alair Homes because I ran my own company a couple times. Once I had a small renovation company in Vancouver, Lower Mainland area, and then when I moved out here to Calgary, I ended up working for a home builder. And then when we had the flood, I worked for a company called HR Pacific, who are really great builders and are still working in inner BC. But they were working on a house here in Calgary. And then we had that flood, a big flood in 2013. And when that flood occurred, the homeowner invited myself and my partner Brian back to help with the flood restoration. The guys from HR Pacific had since moved on to other projects, and so it made sense for us to get involved there. And that one project was a pretty significant, like modern architecturally driven home in Roxborough. And then that just led to like a job over here and a job over here and a job over there, which turned into 10 years of running a company called Brookwright before I made the transition to join the Alair network of builders.
Hmm. Great. Can you talk a little more about that network? What does that look like?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And this is why. So I heard a couple of your podcasts, and I heard one with Brandon Fuchs, who was talking about like his True North construction, I think. But it's really interesting because I was looking at my business as Brookwright, and I realized there was kind of something missing, and there was an ability to both scale but also have just a more manageable system that I used in the back end to run my company. So I was looking around. So I was looking at groups like Breakthrough Academy. I was looking at business coaching. I was looking at hiring a CFO. And I had these options. And then I had the chance to meet a few of the people in the Alair network already and just got very curious about what that looks like and how that goes together. And what it looks like and how I describe it is I think of Alair like an Earl's restaurant where you can have like you go to Earl's because you expect good food, you expect a consistent menu, you get high level service, you get well designed tap rooms, and you get kind of like an upscale um, repeatable experience. But you can go to Earl's in Stephen Ave downtown and have a slightly different experience than you would at Earl's in Tin Palace or Earl's in the Northwest. They all kind of have their own individual flavor, and Earl's self-describes themselves as a collection of independently compelling restaurants, which I thought was intriguing. And that's how I think of Alair, as it's a collection of independently compelling custom home builders and renovators all across North America. So there's 110, I think, partners running under the Alair banner right now, which amounts to a whole lot of custom construction and a whole lot of lessons learned and idea sharing and marketing sharing and resource sharing. And like if I need to hire a project manager, we have a recruiter that works with our Alair teams. If I need to have a contract for something specific, I can just go online into our database, find it. I don't have to spend that time writing that. So what the Alair system really tries to do is put builders in a position where they can build effectively, because all the back end stuff that people people who didn't pursue an academic path and gravitated to construction, it kind of helps support the back end of that and just let me focus on building both my team and the best projects we can for our clients. So it's been pretty interesting to kind of understand how that network all fits together.
Yeah, that's great. That sounds like an efficient system to group together the back end support and then all the
Mhm.
other owners who are running each unit.
And and it's kind of fun. Like I think one of the things that you're trying to solve with this podcast, which is admirable, and one of the things that I find really gratifying in Alair is we'll have like mastermind groups where it's like, hey, we're going to do a pre-construction mastermind group every week. A couple of ladies from Georgia within Alair run it, and they just talk about like how can we do project planning or pre-construction better? Like what would that look like? So you have this like weekly mastermind, and I always say like nothing unifies like a shared struggle, and running a construction business is a struggle most of the time. And so just sometimes knowing that like I can call I can call Daniel in Florida and be like, "Hey man, I got this big slab I got to do. How should I pour this? It's going to be 30 degrees out when I need to pour this. Like, you guys must know how to do this." I can call Daniel and I can pick his brain. I can call the guys in San Diego. I can call all over the place just to access these little resources and ideas that help that shared struggle now becomes a shared burden, and we can start solving it together. And that feels really good.
That's great.
Yeah.
And then, so you also host the Builders and Brews network. Can you talk about that and what
Yeah,
that group
yeah,
looks
yeah.
like?
Yeah, for sure. So this predated my involvement with Alair, but I had an experience in a brewery. So we were helping build out Annex Ales, a brewery here.
Mhm.
We were working in there, and I got to see like there's nothing there. It's an empty warehouse essentially when we start. We're building the bar, we're building building out the tap room, and we'd be there working with the guys, and I'd see other brewers come in, and you could pick them out because they all had Blundstones and beards and Carhartts on. So you'd see other brewers show up, and you'd be like, "Hey, what are you guys doing here?" And so I had a few different experiences where brewers showed up to help them set up their equipment because they didn't want Andrew and Erica to mess it up. Other brewers showed up with pallet of hops because they knew that they were going to need these specific hops to brew this specific beer.
Uh-huh.
Other brewers showed up with kegs of beer. Like, what are you guys doing? Like, you're bringing your product to your competitors. Like, what is happening here? Like, we on our job sites, and I've told this story before, so I apologize to people that have heard it, but like nobody shows up on one of your job sites and be like, "Hey, I had an extra load of doors. I know you need some doors over here, so here's some doors." Or nobody says like, "Hey Nick, have you used this pocket door hardware yet? Like, it's amazing. Here, try it out. Like, let me show you how I did it." We don't do that enough in construction. So when I talked to a couple of the brewers and started to understand how they recognize that their competition is not actually each other. Their competition is like the InBevs and the Molsons and the Pepsi and the really big multinational companies. And so by working together locally, they could build each other up and educate consumers and kind of capture a bigger piece of that beverage market pie than they would each individually battling each other. And so that felt really good to me to see that happen. And then I reached out to a couple of my colleagues here and said, "Hey guys, I had this experience. How can we do this kind of?" And so then we just started hosting events. And the first one was in 2018 maybe or 19, and we had Kevin Gray, who's an interior designer here, specializes in timber frame homes. He has a company called Studio Ridge Interiors, and a fellow named Ken from Peak Designs does architectural design. We had them come in and explain how they approach the pre-construction process, and we had about 30 or 40 builders there. So we had a little education component, and then a couple hours rather of just having a beer with your kind of industry colleagues, and that's continued growing from there, which has been pretty cool. So now we've hosted events in quite a number of cities, I think 5 or 6 different cities other than Calgary, and we've continued hosting regular events here. So we have one coming up on April 4, and then we have another one coming up the following month, a workshop on managing overwhelm, which I think is something that's very present in our industry right now, but not always talked about. So anyway, so yeah, Builders and Brews, but it's like,
that's great.
It's pretty simple. You just get a bunch of contractors and designers and vendors in a room, and you add a little bit of education and an open attitude of collaboration, and you can share stories over a beer or a cider or a quench if you want. It's not that hard to put together. It's been pretty cool to see
great.
how that works.
I really like how you adopted that sort of attitude from the brewer, like micro brewer industry.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
I'm always curious what lessons we can take from other industries, and like that the craft one was really impactful because I think like people like me and you who pursue carpentry because we want to build things with our hands, we want to build beautiful things. I think that gets a little lost in our industry, which is so much of which is informed by the commodity side of the industry, where it's like, hey, we're doing tract building.
Yeah.
We need to build this many square foot and it needs to cost this much so we can sell it for this much so we can make this much money. Then it might as well be like soybeans or something. Like
Yeah,
it could
yeah,
be any
it's
commodity.
totally
Yeah.
commoditized. Yeah.
Whereas on the craft side of the industry, because the consumer has a better understanding of what went into that product, they're willing to pay a substantial premium over what, if you just, the beer example again, like if you just wanted to get a beer for $1, you could go get a can of Molson Canadian, but you'll go pay $6 or $7 for the same volume of beer in a tap room because you have a better connection, it's a better brand, it's a way better quality product. And I think our job, especially our smaller side of the industry, does a pretty crappy job right now of kind of describing that difference. What makes something a craft pursuit and what makes something a commodity driven application. So it's something I think about a lot.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to hear your thoughts about that, because that's, yeah, specifically what I like to address on the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, talk about sort of like what led you like to that realization to make the distinction. Okay, we need to not become a commodity and race to the bottom.
Yeah. It comes from a few places, like, but it comes from that experience of like when I was thinking through that one day where I'm like, why am I paying a 600% premium for a beer? And why am I happy about it? Like, I'm not, sometimes you overpay for something, you're like, oh, I didn't need to do that. Like, that was dumb. But in that situation, because I had a connection to the people that made it, I had the experience of sitting in the tap room, enjoying it with my friends. I was willing to pay a substantial premium for that product versus what I might have just been able to get a beer for. So that started making me think about it. And then I think about, we were talking about it in your shop in the back a little bit, where it's like, it's really difficult to effectively price anything, especially the more custom you get and the more boutique you get, the price delta starts to grow. And it's very difficult to present. So a bid for wall paneling, like, okay, how can you make that competitive but still make it beautiful? And so I think a lot of that comes ahead of that with education and looking at how our contracts are actually structured and how our industry is structured sort of inherently through the way contracts are put together and the way the industry is always operated. That commodity side dictates terms more often because all the CCDC contracts and all the new home warranty standards and everything is dictated by those really large corporations, because they large corporations, large developers, but also government bodies. And so it does a poor job of explaining like the code minimum is just the minimum. Like that's the cheapest thing you can build. But what guys like you and I offer is something far removed from that. So we need to do a better job of explaining that quality to clients before we've even submitted a bid. And I don't know the answer, but I just know that I know it's a pain point for a lot of our industry. And maybe part of just recognizing where that pain exists is when you're looking at a job being like, is this a commodity driven job or is this a true like craft pursuit? And which side of that equation do I want to be on? Like, do I, because there's a good living to be made and gratifying work to be done in the production side. You could be a production framer, you could trim out houses, and you could like, there's a fun like rush to that side of it. It's like, okay, I gotta install these 8 doors this afternoon so that I can make my allowed time. That can be gratifying. That can be just as gratifying sometimes as spending 8 hours to install 1 door. But like, so it's thinking about where you fit in the industry, both currently, where you want to be, how you can find that balance of commodity versus craft, and then how you educate people about where you fit on that spectrum and what you actually want to gravitate to doing.
Yeah, so finding like distinguishing, I'm gonna do one or do the other, or this is where I land on the scale, instead of trying to cover all the bases.
Yeah, because covering all the bases, you just end up running around a lot, and I don't think you do your best work in either lane when you're constantly running back and forth. Is jarring both for you but also for your clients, whether they're builders or homeowners. It's confusing for them. Like,
so that conversation, so you said you can have the conversation, educate your clients even before submitting a bid. What does that look like for you?
In our context, so from a general contracting standpoint, like your body of work really speaks for itself. So it's like the kind of standard, like make sure you're documenting your projects, make sure you're explaining it. To me, I like to approach it a little earlier. So we have a few. So I decided quite a while ago that what we specialize in is architect and designer led forever homes. So really being clear about what your criteria for who your clients are is helpful because you can qualify clients earlier, which doesn't put you in those positions where it's like, I can't do this for $2,000. Like that's not what I do. So knowing your sort of client acceptance criteria, I think is really important. For us, it's has to be led by an architect or a designer. The clients have to believe it's their forever home when they're building it because that changes the value they're prepared to put into both the materials but also the work that goes into it. And then ideally, our ideal clients have an experience in building before, so we don't have to educate them all the way through because there's a lot to learn on the client side and it's a big job. So our ideal clients, architect and designer led, forever home, experience doing construction in the past, and just knowing those three things, now it becomes quite easy if I get a call and it's like, hey, you want to do an addition? Do you have a designer? Oh, I don't need to hire a designer. I'm sorry, we can't work with you. This is not going to be this is not the type of project we're best at doing, but I can refer you to this person or this person or this person. And having that network of people who love to do that kind of work. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just being clear about what you want to do.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. So really knowing your audience makes that communication process easier because you're only getting into the conversation with somebody who already knows sort of what they want
Yeah.
and the expectation is there.
Yeah, exactly. And it's smoother for them too. Like if you hire somebody, if budget is a primary driver and you hire a person on further on the craft side of the industry, on the custom side, it's going to suck for everybody all the way through. Like so being clear about that early. We were talking about this with my business partner Katie yesterday. Like clear is kind. And like it might seem cruel or snooty or off-putting on the surface of it, but that clarity is actually a kindness when drawn out on a longer
You're
time
doing
scale.
everyone a favor,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, by being clear.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. What would you say in terms of the I'm trying to ask, like, what can we do in the industry overall to improve that communication? So, or is there anything you do, like, sort of to educate
Yeah.
in general?
It's how can I do this? Okay, so things I've used in the past is, have you ever seen something called the homeowner's emotional roller coaster?
No.
So it's a guy, David. No, it's not David Gersteil. It was anyway. This fellow wrote this book based on this concept of like a homeowner's emotional roller coaster, and I encourage people to just Google that. But it's like it tracks emotions throughout a project, not just like quality time schedule. It tracks how people react to things, and it's funny because you see the same pattern repeat. And the first low in construction is actually contract signing. So people start design, they're excited, it's great. Then the mood level plummets into contract signing, which is often when guys like you and I are just being introduced to the project. So we're coming in. So a part of that education is just giving a voice to that process and giving a voice to that visual where it's like, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Client, I know this part stinks. Like, but look, we're here right now. Let's get through this. This is what you need to know. And so we can get up to here where we're framing, we're doing drywall, we're doing this. But then again, recognize that there's another low that's going to come. And that low is going to come when the drywall's done and the floors are in. And you're wondering, like, when can we move in? It looks like we should be able to move in next week. Nope, there's still all the trim work and there's still everything else to go in. So, like, hold your horses. But giving space to the fact that construction on all stakeholders is an emotional process and that's okay, that I find is very helpful. And then more broadly, we kind of have a steep hill to climb as small operators in construction because clients have been informed for so long about how construction works by HGTV and by the marketing from the Tricos and Brookfields and all these people where it's like, buy a move-in ready home for $450,000. And that's because they're way on the commodity side. They've got it dialed, they've got it figured out. I can't compete building a custom home with a tract builder who has different revenue sources. So as an industry, that's again why Builders and Brews, why I think it's great that you're doing this podcast, because some of that comes just with starting to have these conversations and starting to give your audience some of the sort of mindset tools to understand where their value is and why they should be proud of that and not ashamed whenever they hand across a bid. Like that's what the work costs. We know because we've been doing this. But yeah, it's not a nut I've cracked completely. It's a steep hill to climb, and as construction is changing quite quickly over the last few years and costs continue to escalate, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is except to talk that through and be authentic to the things you're not willing to compromise on when it comes to both the work that you deliver, but the way you're treated by the people around you as well.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable. Even like you said, just to vocalize that conversation. Yeah, there's going to be an emotional roller coaster, and to just to give people the awareness.
Yeah.
And so then, just having the awareness, makes the impact so much less because I knew this was going to happen.
Yeah.
This is going to be part of the process. So I think
and it
valuable.
normalizes it. Like they might be super pissed off and be like, God, they might be feeling badly about themselves because they're feeling these emotions, but nobody's given a voice to it. So like, how can we make space for that? It's something I've been thinking about as well lately. Is like we always have that project management triangle of like quality, schedule, quality, schedule, and cost, right? I think we are moving, or we need to move to a place in construction where there's sort of like a fourth component to that, and that component is like some of my colleagues in Alair call it a stress-free experience. Some people call it just fun. So like it's another component. It's a component that
like the psychological aspect.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah. That measures like the feeling of a project. And that for me came from a place where a few years ago we had a massive project going on in Springbank. There'd be like 20 or 30 trucks there every day, and there were lots of 60 people or so on site sometimes. There was quite a large house, and it was a very difficult project. The clients weren't always happy, but we worked through it all. But what was interesting in that process is the client would come to site, and she said to us one time, she said, guys, like I said, I know things have been difficult on some parts of this project. And so, but when I come to site, it's like everybody wants to be here. And she said, and that improves her perception of the project and experience of doing the project, which I thought was interesting because by any measure on that specific project, we missed schedule, we missed budget, we nailed quality through the roof. But we also had this kind of fourth factor of enjoyment or fun, or like I hesitate to call it love because it's not exactly what it is, but people who were there, positive vibes. Like people who were there cared about being there to a degree that the client could feel that, and that improved her experience both of going through the construction process, but also of being in the home later. So one of the things I've taken away from that is like, I think making an earlier connection with the clients to the people that are actually doing the work, like humanizing the people that are involved in the process, that can be really valuable. And so the teeny tiny ways we apply that is like, if I'm having a site visit with an architect and homeowner, I try to stop and introduce every person we come across as we're touring around the house. Like, oh, this is Jim. He's been doing this. He's been painting with this group for 16 years, and now he's doing this. And then I'll if that trade is up for it, I'll give Jim a chance just to like, hey, Jim, tell us what you're doing. And like hearing clients later then describe to other people what made the painting that Jim was doing specific and special to their project, that like just opens up a new part of their brain, I guess, and part of something in the project they weren't even thinking about.
Yeah, and it's almost creating new value because it's new information. Yes. Oh yeah, the sills on my window, Brad made them this way, and so it's part of the adds to the whole experience of having something built.
And it's so cool, but it doesn't show up anywhere. But like that, like that's an exact and like you've had that experience too, it seems like. But when you hear like when the clients are telling like their friends or somebody else comes, they're like, look, see how this lines up with that over there? Like that was on purpose. And I'm always like, yes, that's like they're getting it. And that's not something that you measure on a spreadsheet. It's not something you see on a time card. You can't put it on an invoice, but it has value. And I think that's a part of that distinction between that craft commodity experience that I think we need to be paying better attention to as like the custom side of the industry as things move ahead.
Absolutely. And I like the fourth.
Yeah.
The fourth, let's make it a square, not a triangle, right?
Yeah.
And add that. And I've talked with people about this before because I've noticed that on job sites, like mental health. So you mentioned like psychology, but people's mental health, and that becomes huge. Like when I was just an apprentice, I'd be on a job site for 6 months, and it's a family with 4 young children, and their kitchen is in their garage, and then and then it's winter, and you can see like people are suffering, and it's like, wow, we don't want to put people through that. So what can you do to
how can you help with that?
Make the experience better in that way?
Or even the people that show up to work on these job sites every day. Like, you go into some job sites and it just feels toxic isn't quite the right word, but there's just like, I don't know, some jobs just don't have a good feeling. But how can you how can the energy you bring to work contribute to a positive job site, whether it's your job or somebody else's? And some of that's just with like the ways you interact with people and like the most basic communication stuff where it's like, and so back to learning from other industries. I read a book a few years ago called The Four Seasons by a guy named Isidore Sharp, and he created the Four Seasons hotels, and so then it made me think, what can we take from the hospitality industry and apply that to construction? So like we in Brookwright used to have like, so a hospitality rule, if you're a hostess at a hotel, let's say, they have some dead simple, like measurable rules of like, hey, if a customer approaches the desk within 15 feet, you make eye contact, smile. If the customer's within 5 feet, you stop what you're doing, verbal greeting. If they've approached the desk, hello, I'm whatever. Like they had steps, measurable steps that you could follow. And so the dead simple lesson there that we can take, certainly with our team, and encourage it through leadership with our trade partners, is like when somebody new walks onto the job site, hey, how's it going? I'm Byron. Like, what are you here to do? Oh, I'm doing this. Like, recognize that we're all humans, and ultimately we want to get along. We want to feel safe. So how can we create those little moments rather than like, I've had the experience of on job sites, or more certainly commercial job sites, where there was this sort of like adversarial spirit built throughout it, where you'd walk on the jobs and be like, who the fuck are you? What are you doing here? And it's like, oh, well, I'm here to do my job. I'm sorry, like if that's a problem. So thinking about those little quirks of how you interact with people on the job site, I think is interesting, and something we can do. That doesn't take a huge lift.
Yeah. Let me turn. Phone's going off here.
Oh, it's mine.
Is it?
No, it's mine. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Oh, all good. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's just little things you can do that are easy to implement, like free to implement.
Yeah.
Those little tweaks. Do you have those, or maybe Alair has them like systemized and laid out as like part of their process?
Some of that is, but I think it's more through our own specific team of like our core values and our key team behaviors that describe those values, and then just like talking about those every week. And so one of our values is laugh like old friends. And so what steps can you take? Well, you can't laugh like an old friend until you know somebody's name. So how can you like break that back down to steps that create little actionable items that you can do every day without having to fill out a friggin' form or do another piece of input? All you're doing is just being kind and bringing that to work. And I think that's valuable.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm sure that's a lot of value, and it gets reflected in the final product, right? If everybody, like you said, everybody's happy to be there, they're proud of the work that they're doing, they enjoy coming to work, then like their actual outputs are going to be, they're going to be better.
Yeah, and thinking about how that experience of construction contributes to the client's enjoyment of the finished product. Because I was describing our project, I met with a guy a couple of years later. I was going over to his house to assess a renovation, And I went into the house and it's completely brand new and beautiful. And I was like, what are you going to renovate here? And his position was the house was beautiful, but the experience had been so terrible that he couldn't live in the house as
Wow.
it was. Money wasn't really an object for this specific client. But so like the inverse of that other experience where like quality was good, schedule was good, budget was good, but the experience of going through all of that was so crappy that he couldn't live there anymore. I
Wow.
was like, whoa, interesting. It can go completely the other way. So yeah, so that's what I'm curious is how can we take lessons from other industries, but also create a way to measure the experience that a client has, not just a client, but everybody has throughout a project. So yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you have anything in place for
Yeah.
measuring?
So what we do,
that?
is, and I learned this from one of my colleagues at Trickle Creek, another home builder actually. At We do a weekly report every week, and in our weekly reports to the clients and designer and team, we have a little form at the end, just a Microsoft form that we set up that has like a couple of dead simple questions, like how do you feel about your project this week out of 10 stars? How well do you understand where the budget's at right now? Is there anything specific you'd like us to dive into this next week? And it's dead simple questions. Microsoft, it goes into a form and all those results get tallied. But like if we have a client that drops to a 7 or a 6, okay, I know that I as a partner or Katie needs to get involved and get ahead of it kind of, because what happens on projects otherwise, if you're not creating that feedback loop, you just go for months and then the clients blow up and you're like, what happened? Well, remember back in December when you guys didn't sweep the driveway? Like they're still mad about that.
Yeah.
In the meantime, if we had just given them a way to give us a feedback loop. So that's one. We are also implementing, I want to have trade partner reviews of us. So like at the end of a project, like tell us how we did, tell us what we could have done better. Because I think that's a part that's missed quite often in our industry too, is like our trade partners do 85-90% of the actual physical work on site, but we never go back and ask like, how could this have been better for you? Did you make money on this project? Like having some of those conversations are really interesting. And lead to, I think, just better engagement, and ultimately will lead to better outcomes. So that's one we do right now is we have a client feedback loop that's every week. And then I want to implement a trade partner post-project feedback loop as well.
That's
Because I
great.
think if we just keep repeating the same mistakes and like blaming it on trades or blaming it on clients or blaming it on designers, we're never going to improve as an industry. And so we have to look for these little ways to help get there.
Yeah, I think that's great, the feedback loops. And on that note, do you think we are improving as an industry, like in your experience as a whole? And
Yes, I think we are, and I think it's because we need to. Like, I'm legitimately concerned right now about the price of construction, and like we've encountered a few clients lately where it's untenable to be able to afford to do what they want to do, or they'll like, we want to do this, we think it's going to cost $400,000, or we don't know, and then I present a feasibility budget of 700, and they're like, whoa. Okay, so now they have a hard choice, and you can walk through all that with them. But a lot of that's a product of inflation in construction materials. And now I think we're seeing labor inflation coming up. So I think what's going to be interesting, and it's going back to a part of why I joined Alair, is because so a part of the problem with our industry is that most of it's made up of like 2 to 10 person companies. That's like, I forget what it is, but it's 70 to 80% of the whole industry is 2 to 10 person companies. And what happens there is those groups have no meaningful ability to invest in research and development or try anything new. And they have no ability to vertically integrate how they're offering their services. And even if they do manage to achieve a couple of those things, their ability to scale is quite narrow. So maybe you're the absolute blow up best builder in Ottawa, for example. Your scale is to some degree limited by your local geography, right? Because you can scale beyond that, but that's a really hard thing to do. And
that's a big leap to get outside of one city.
Yeah. So you could have this amazing builder in Ottawa that's that has the best process for client retention and has the best process for hiring and the best framer in the world, and they have all these things, but they're just limited there. So there's no way to say like, okay, how can we apply that in Vancouver, and how can we bring that to Minnesota? Like, how can we do that? So I think what we're going to see in the industry, unfortunately, or maybe not, is some of the smaller groups start to aggregate into larger ones, whether that's like joining a group like PCL, or whether that's creating kind of like a network of trades and builders in a local geography that share like an apprentice, for example. And there's some of that happens already. But our industry more broadly, it has to change because we're just wildly inefficient in how we deliver things. And like we talked about, like on the craft side, my fear there is that it's only going to be sort of the 1% of like the wealthiest people are going to be able to afford the services that we offer.
It'll become unreachable.
Yeah. And it's not because you and I are putting $50,000 in our pocket every month. It's because that's truly what it costs to employ skilled people, to purchase the right materials, and to get things done effectively in the current environment that we're in. So I'm optimistic that our industry will start to change, and I think we'll start to employ some prefabricated solutions and more digital manufacturing. But I think that's still quite a few years away, and I think the realities of sort of struggling with labor shortages is something we're going to have to learn to deal with. But I also think it's a problem that we're better trying to solve together, especially when we recognize like that. Again, the track builders have it figured out. They can do a repeatable process, and that's more manufacturing than it is construction, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But how can we apply some of the lessons they're learning there to one-off custom projects? But again, I don't know. But I think it is improving, but we have a long way to go.
Yeah, and I think you're right there when you say basically the little small operations are too inefficient.
Yeah.
Or they're like, they're basically just too inefficient to be able to scale or grow, or and that's not sustainable if we want to like keep, stop runaway prices and and be able to deliver consistent results. So that'll be interesting to see what sort of happens if they amalgamate and what kind of groups form.
I'm endlessly curious. And one of the things we're doing, the Builders and Brews event that we have on April 4 is exploring a version of that problem, I guess. But so what we're looking at in this April 4 event is it a feature or a flaw in our industry that we so readily spawn off new companies? So like there's two electricians I know, and we'll call them Bill and Jeff. And like, so Bill ran a company for 15 years, and Jeff was his apprentice, started out of school with him, came up all the way through his apprenticeship, got to a point where he was running electrical jobs, had a couple guys. So they had kind of a crew of 8 or 9 guys. Jeff gets to a place where he's like, okay, I'm ready for the next challenge, goes to Bill and says, Bill, I'd like to talk about ownership or partnership. Bill says, great, been waiting for this. I'm ready to retire in 10 years. Like, let's do this. So Bill goes out and says, okay, I think the company's worth $3 million. Jeff says, okay, based on what? But let's keep talking. And then so Bill says, you know what, Jeff, if you give me $250,000, you can have 10% of the company. And then Jeff looks at it and is like, 250 grand. Wait a minute. I'd have to get a mortgage, do this. It's going to take me years to pay that back. Why don't I just take $10,000, get a website, a magnet on the side of my truck, take a couple clients with me, and go start my own company? Because on the face of it at that moment, that looks like the cheaper option. But what Jeff doesn't realize is that as soon as he leaves Bill, I'm losing track of the names, but as soon as he leaves Bill, he loses the institutional knowledge that existed within that company, right? And that is all those forms, and in the way you vet clients, and the way you buy wire at a scale, like, so all these things. So he loses that institutional knowledge. He goes out and makes a bunch of the same mistakes for the first 3 to 5 years of his operation before he gets things stable, gets to the same point in 5 to 10 years, and then repeats that same cycle. So there's something in there that we need to look at. I'm describing it, making it sound more like a flaw, but maybe it is a feature, because maybe Jeff could try some things that Bill never wanted to try. But what other models of sort of ownership and partnership and collaboration are out there that people aren't giving a voice to? And so in this April 4 one, we have a panel discussion with Amanda Hamilton, John Wheeler, who owns Wheeler Mechanical, and then Anthony from Luso Custom Homes. So those three are going to have a panel discussion exploring why they chose to go out on their own. How come in the case of John's company has grown a lot, Amanda's company has retained a lot of the same people and grown a lot for the last 10 plus years. So how are people thinking about that differently? And then we want to do an exercise, like an interactive exercise, mapping out almost, I call it a bastard family tree exercise, but it's almost like a virology exercise where it's like, who are some of the original, whether it's design or construction companies that then spawned off all these other companies? And when we start to see this sort of web, it'll be really interesting to look at and see what connections already exist. Because like somebody like whatever Jeff might realize that Steven also worked for Bill back in the day, and like, oh hey, and you live in the north and I live in the south. If we teamed up together, now we can be more efficient. We can hire that bookkeeper that I really wanted to hire, but I just don't quite have the revenue. We can like, somebody can be in charge of doing all the paperwork to make sure our licenses are up to date, our professional certifications, all sort of the bureaucracy stuff, and you can be stronger together. So anyway, it's going to be a really interesting exercise, and I don't know where it's going to lead, but it'll be cool to see that put together.
Yeah, that sounds really good. And two things I got from there. So you described like a loop. So like in the industry and this tracks because like we're stuck in a loop of repeating the same thing, and so we're not progressing like you could see in other industries where they have sort of a continuous growth, repeating like you said, and I definitely see that same mistakes being repeated. So it'll be interesting to see if there's somewhere where you can disconnect and get out of that loop. So that's cool.
It's a funny sort of unique thing to our industry where like, so somebody doesn't work at Sherwin-Williams, the paint store, for like 5 years. I mean, like, I hate this paint store. I'm going to go start my own paint store. Like, you just don't do that in manufacturing. Or the other example I use is Nike. Like, nobody works at Nike and is like, these are dumb shoes. I'm going to go start my own shoe company. Like, for some reason, our industry, and I think we're kind of proud of it, but we're not all, like, getting a carpentry ticket doesn't automatically make you a bang up entrepreneur.
No.
And yet that seems to be a path that many people are in our industry aspire to, is like, I'm going to own my own thing one day. That's great, but is that actually the best use of the resources that we have as an industry to be more effective? And I would argue a lot of the time it's not, because an entrepreneurial skill set is something that's difficult to teach, but it's also very different from a carpentry skill set. Like, that's it's sort of a related rabbit hole to that whole discussion.
It's very interesting. And the other one was, is there any like industry organizations or institutions that are going like sort of looking at the same issue in the way you're talking about at your next meetup?
I don't think so. No, it's because it seems like a gap that I hadn't heard anybody talking about it. It came from a book I read called Broken Buildings, Busted Budgets, which is really, really good. And just looking at like at some of the systemic flaws in our whole industry. But no, I don't think so. I don't think that there's a group called Breakthrough Academy. They're really good, and I think they're kind of looking at it, but they're helping entrepreneurs run better construction and trade companies. I don't know if they've kind of stepped back and are looking at like, why does this keep happening? And then the like standard construction associations, I don't think they're there yet, because I think sort of because they're a pay to play model, and they're tend, in my experience, to be older and friggin' boring, that like I didn't get out of school thinking, oh man, I'm super excited about paying $2,500 a year to join this like organization with board meetings and all this boring stuff and breakfast that I have to pay $80 to go to. So I don't know that those industries in my experience really represent the people who are on the ground doing the work. I think
Right.
they're a part of the system, but I think they
Yeah,
serve.
those are the established, sort
Yeah,
of
yeah,
established long
yeah.
term, and so that they don't see the same issues if
No, no.
those companies have been around
Yeah.
50 years.
And they serve the commodity side of the industry more readily
Yeah.
than they do the craft side of the industry, because that's where the money is and that's where the political pressure is. But like the irony there being like the guy that maybe he worked for a company and they were members of the construction association and he went to all the things, but when he was like, when I'm starting my own company, I'm not doing any of this. So like
Yeah.
he falls off the radar because that institution was part of what he or she didn't like about about the previous company. So yeah.
Mhm.
But I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
But that's what Builders and Brews. That's what
Yeah,
we're trying
that's
to do is
great.
like
That's
create spaces
mhm.
for those conversations and seeing where it goes from there.
Uh-huh. Okay, great. Can you give like a few tips for the small contractor who's like just who struggles with communication in general? The contractor, and then I'll ask you for like their customer, like as a customer, what questions can they ask
Oh,
to get better outcomes?
okay, that's a good one. As a contractor, what communication tools can you use? Try to avoid like cliched advice, but it's difficult because it's the
Mhm.
best. But like knowing what your values are. So really taking a step back and looking at like, okay, what are your values as both as a human and how are those expressed in your company? And then taking another step to describe key team behaviors. Like if one of our values is run a tight ship. Um, what does that mean? Okay, well that means that a toolbox meeting every week. It means you enter your time at the end of the day. It means you send out your weekly reports. It means that we set the standard for cleanliness on our job sites. So every day when you go to the job site, you run your checklist of like, are the fences straight and secure? Is the sign is the yard clean? Like, so running a tight ship then quickly can turn into key team behaviors, which now it's not Nick that has to do it. It's not Byron. This is how we can express these values as a team. And I think that it's a step. I think a lot of people go and make those values and put them somewhere, but then never act them out. So key team behaviors for core values is one that was impactful for us. Another one that I just learned recently, which I've used a few times and is really valuable, is at the end of a conversation, at the end of any conversation, asking the other party, what are you taking away from our chat today? And if people just did that one, because you can have a conversation with clients and they leave with something completely different. Like you might have been trying to tell them like the bathtub you wanted, you cannot order. And they might have come out of that hearing, we should probably get a hot tub. And it's like, and so you'll come back to like the same conversation later and be like, what? You want a hot tub? Like, and they're like, yeah, that's what you said. I'm like, no, I said you couldn't have a bathtub.
Yeah.
So asking the other party, what are you taking away from this conversation, whether that's your spouse or a client or an employee, is super insightful because then people can tell you what's important to them. And now you can now you can go to work on that rather than just sort of imposing what you thought was the right solution for them.
That's great.
So those two, turn core values into key team behaviors and revisit them all the time, and then asking at the end of a conversation, what are you taking away from this conversation? Those are good.
Awesome. That's great. And then on the customer side, what I asked was what questions can they ask that can improve their outcome. So whether that's at the very initiation, like first contact, or once their project is starting.
I think from a customer standpoint, the three corner exercise, but then also the fourth sort of dimension of stress-free experience is asking the clients to prioritize those four items, like which is most important to you, and having the clients be clear with themselves on what they think the most important is, because that will help set up the construction team to either do their best work or ensure that they're the right fit. So that's one that clients could do. I think visiting that emotional roller coaster is extremely valuable, and like recognizing that this is an emotional process. It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be hammers and nails and spreadsheets and all these things. But it is an emotional process, and that should be recognized, and clients should be thinking about recognizing that, basically. And then other questions, if I were a client, I would ask for trade partner references. This is something my old partner Brian was always very particular about, because I don't think people often ask, but I do it the other way. If I want to find a new drywaller, I'll go ask painters who the best drywaller is, because they know. If I want to find the best cribber, I'll go ask the framers who's the best cribber, because they know. And I don't think people often go to trade partners and ask who's the best builder, because I think there's some valuable lessons in there, that would be helpful for a client's understanding the difference between how different builders operate. So if clients were to reach out to trades and like, hey, tell me your experience with Alair, but now tell me some less than positive experiences you've had. Tell me when you worked with Alair on a project, and something went wrong, how did they respond? Asking some of those sort of probing questions, I think, would be an interesting way for clients to learn about the construction team that they're about to embark on this project with. And if I were really pushing it, I would ask, that's tricky, because I was gonna say, I would want the clients, if I were in the client's position, I would ask to speak to a client that maybe didn't have the best experience with your company, which is like super scary, but I think is also like an open acknowledgement of like, projects are difficult. It takes a team. You clients are part of that team. There'd be some interesting conversations to be had in there too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I'm curious how other people have responded to that question. I'm curious what other questions clients could be asking, or even what do you think?
Yeah, from the client, like really just like knowing who you're dealing with, and like setting the expectations. For me, like expectations are really big. Yeah, so if I was hiring a company, like I would ask like about their systems, like how do you communicate? How often are you going to communicate with me? Like what updates am I going to get? How do you like manage your team, your trade partners? Yeah, in my business, I'm big on systemizing and having processes to get things done. So then I would look for, that's what I would look for, is do they have a system, or are they flying by the seat of their pants, right? Because some companies can do great work, but can they do it twice in a row? Like, is that a repeatable system?
Yeah, interesting. That's a good one. Yeah, I don't think about that because I'm not a systems guy, but it'd be interesting to have clients ask that. Cool.
Yeah, and you might only get it from business owners.
Yeah, that's right. But it would tell you something about where their priorities are, and how they want to be communicated with. Cool. Neat.
Great. Anything else you want to cover?
No, I don't. I mean, lots of things, but no, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think that was great. Those are good. Those are good questions.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So can you tell people where they can find you?
Yeah. Over there. Yeah. So easiest is Instagram. That's where I'm most active. So I'm Byron Brooks YYC there. And then Builders and Brews, like I mentioned, that's also on there. And then you can get from there to the website where you get the newsletter and see all the upcoming events. And then Alair Homes Calgary is my day job. And that can be found all over the place.
All right. Great. Cool. Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on. That was a great conversation.
No, that was awesome.
Appreciate it.